My name is Jolly Mokorosi, and I thank you for joining us on Wealth at Work, a show that focuses on wealth creation and education in South Africa. When my friend Babalwa first told me about Epokotweni, I was enthralled. A financial services professional with a background in tax, asset management, and banking, she longed to find a space for conversations, learnings, and co-creation about personal financial stewardship presented in isiXhosa, her mother tongue. So she did just that. Babalwa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So what is Epokotweni from your perspective?
Thanks, Jolly. The concept of Epokotweni really came out of what I call my audio psychological memory, because I grew up listening to radio at my grandparents' Yes. So battery, you needed to save the battery. The radio wasn't always on. So there was always, the news were very important to my grandfather. And so at the top of every hour, the news would be on. Then there would be the story. And then there would be the death announcements. And so in thinking about not only just changing the world, but loss with the COVID pandemic, job losses, particularly for a lot of people, I started to wander into that audio memory and think to myself, what if in addition to the news, the story, and the death announcements, that people that look like me and you, that speak my home language, could say somebody was talking in a public platform in my language, saying what sort of things to look out for when you start working, when you lose a job, or just how to look after what it is that you have, because that's essentially what financial stewardship is about. So that for me is the heart of Epokotweni. It is trying to remove the intimidation from money matters and speaking them in a language and hopefully contributing to the future audio memory and the language or the knowledge creation in my language with regards to matters of personal financial stewardship.
I think for me, that was the other fascinating thing, was the desire to do it in isiXhosa. What were the hurdles?
I think these days we raise children in a very cosmopolitan society, and we also are very cosmopolitan individuals. So even though your social circle might be maybe mostly Black people, but because we don't all speak each other's mother tongues, we tend to be having conversations and living our lives in English. And to an extent, it then makes our mother tongues, not just isiXhosa, but mostly African languages, it makes it seem like intelligence doesn't exist in our languages. And so it angered me in a strange way during the pandemic. You know, the pandemic, Jolly, when you sit and all this time at home, all these, because you're not out a lot, all these things that you didn't realize were angers that you were carrying start bubbling. And it's funny you mentioned the Tutu Fellowship, because in my year, one of the fellows from a prior year came to speak about how the fellowship helped him to process his anger. And he said to us, the ways in which some of you are going to make a difference in the world are when you listen to the things that anger you and you start doing something about it. And so yes, it was in the quietness of the pandemic and mostly having to be at home, working from home, living and working in my home workspace, that then that silence sort of triggered those angers and made me say, look, this is something that I think a lot of our people struggle with. And also it adds intimidation, the fact that this knowledge is only available in English, because very soon we're going to have a generation of African language speakers or their children believing that intelligence or information that is valuable is not really available in our languages. And I just thought, enough of this. Let me see what I can do.
The other fascinating thing for me is that you use folklore to demonstrate how money can be used to explain concepts that would otherwise fly over people's heads. Why folklore?
Because we all grew up being told stories in Zomi, Amabali. Every African country you go to, children are told stories to learn principles about life, because there are lessons that would otherwise be too harsh if it was not in the form of a folklore.
Yes, it wasn't padded nicely.
Folklore pads things nicely. Folklore is relatable across languages, because there are people who listen to my podcast who do not understand Xhosa all that well, but they were also raised on the same stories, on the same kind of folklore. When they catch the thread, then it's like, aha, there's a light bulb that quickly lights up, that illuminates a concept which would otherwise be wrapped up in textbook or technicalese and be out of reach. And so to bridge that gap, really, folklore, I guess, also came to me in my reflections as a useful tool that is maybe underutilized today.
It's funny that you should speak about stories. I associate stories with family time as well. We had a tradition at home that when there was no electricity, our parents had to tell us a story. So these days, I don't know what would happen in the context of load shedding, but I really do absolutely, I still love a good story. And there's that concept of, families gathering around and hearing something out when we talk about stories.
It's funny you should mention the myths and professions in the same sentence. Being in banking, and an executive in banking, everybody expects you to drive a certain type of car. And I just don't drive that certain type of car, whatever it is. I have a car that I've had since 2006. And at times, juniors who would see my car and family members, my mother led a funny campaign of, we're doing against this car, what's wrong?
Stories also come with myths. Two ways about it. What myths did you believe, and what myths do you think people believe about money? When you think about money and you think about this financial journey, these myths that you want to dispel, what myths do you think people believe, and what myths did you believe that you dispelled through your profession or along your journey?
So it's funny you should mention the myths and professions in the same sentence. Being in banking, and an executive in banking, everybody expects you to drive a certain type of car. And I just don't drive that certain type of car, whatever it is. I have a car that I've had since 2006. And at times, juniors who would see my car and family members, my mother led a funny campaign of, we're doing against this car, what's wrong? It didn't bother me to a point where I started thinking, should it bother me? Am I embarrassing colleagues when I show up at a function in this car? There's nothing wrong with it. It takes me from point A to B. So that's one myth. Right, that you need to drive a certain type of car when you are at a certain level in life. It's just not true. It's not to speak against nice things. I like nice things, Jolly. I like nice things as much as the next.
But
I just didn't feel this thing about a car, you know. There's cars that I like, that I look at on the road, but then I'm just like, I don't know. I've not quite gotten to a point where it's made sense to me at this stage in my life to go for that certain type of car. So, because I want it to be known that I do like nice things, but it's just, you know, I haven't felt the need to do it because my colleagues, my fellow EXCO members are driving certain types of cars. The other myth, which I found quite dangerous in chatting to friends of mine who are educated professionals, Jolly, you would be surprised at the number of people who do not have a last will and testament.
And we've talked about this on the show as well. We have talked about this, but it is true. There are so many people who don't have, and I must admit, even me, we had a difficult conversation in our family. It's not the type of conversation that my kids wanted to have with me or my husband wants to have with me. Because as Black people, we think if we have that conversation, somebody's going to kill us, isn't it?
So that surprised me, even though, you know, in my mind, it's one of those things, it's housekeeping, we need to do it. Then the other myth, if I think to myself that I believe, it's certainly when it pertains to financial stewardship matters, because family means everything to me, I think I believed for a very long time that every single financial problem that needed to be solved was for me to rescue. Whether I was asked explicitly or not, or whether I could afford to or not, because this was my family. You know, when you've grown up seeing your parents do their best for you, there's this sense of it's now my turn. And it's a myth, Jolly. It's a myth, because if I carry on feeling like I need to rescue everything, then I am turning myself into a savior. And I don't think that is why I was put on this planet, to be a savior. And secondly, it means I'm showing that I don't have my boundaries where they should be, meaning that I can actually let things into my space that are not supposed to be in my space, or part with resources for, you know, reasons that I could have thought of a little bit differently, or the timing of it I could be arranged. And so that's definitely a myth that I think my contemporaries as well have found themselves believing. And that is taking some unlearning to say, you know, saying no can sometimes be the kindest thing that you say to someone. And because you're first of all kind to yourself, and you're being a good steward of the resources and the time that you're entrusted with.
But it's also like toxic Ubuntu in a sense. That is lack of boundaries.
Definitely such a thing, toxic Ubuntu, because then you are enabling behaviors that will keep people in certain cycles and not growing as well, because they know that you will always rescue certain things. And it's tough when you do it, but with time, I've definitely seen the results where boundaries are strengthened, and it actually says relationships, Charlie. Having healthy boundaries is good for familiar relationships.
But also it robs the other person of the opportunity to creatively solve their problems.
I think that is a big learning. I'm a firstborn daughter. I think that is a cross. It's felt like sometimes like a cross that's used to bear. And so it's really taken some active unlearning on my part to say, you know what, if I really love this family, I need to let all the members of this family really know that they're capable of solving problems creatively, and that they don't need me. I don't need to be a crutch to certain things all the time.
And I'm not a deputy parent.
Yes, there's still some unlearning. There's some days go better than others, but at least we're on the journey.
It's those patterns. You just fall back into those patterns so easily.
If there are certain things that you allow to be part of your toolbox, of your habits, things like spending frivolously, things like not things like not being consistent and tracking yourself. So habits, bad habits, it's like weeds. They will eventually choke out the good things that you are doing.
So from your perspective, what are the top 3 wealth building principles that everyone can apply to their finances today?
The first that I think needs to be spoken on a loud hailer every day, everywhere, is that there's no shortcut. And there are no quick routes. And even the people that seem like they are self-made, they are not overnight successes.
Hearing the whole story, perhaps.
There are no quick routes. There are no shortcuts. So that's the first one, because there's a lot of people promising a lot of things to people on social media. I don't know how many times you see friends who get impersonated by people who claim to be FX traders or Bitcoin traders. And I don't know much about Bitcoin, and I'm not throwing shade by any means, but if it comes as part of what seems to sound like it's too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true.
And you make peace with the fact that even if it was a very good opportunity, scarcity is not to the extent that there will never ever be another good opportunity. Because the temptation is to believe that it's a once in a lifetime, it's never ever going to happen again. And so I must rush now, I must do this at all costs. And there's this urgency that pushes you into actions that actually hamper your long-term goals 9 out of 10 times, if not 99 out of 100 times, And unfortunately, that's something that's so difficult for so many of us to grasp. That's why I absolutely love Dave Ramsey's book, because one of the things that Dave Ramsey does is he speaks about that slow, incremental, do the hard work. There's no shortcuts. Your salary is probably your best bet at wealth creation, not some get rich quick scheme,
Yeah.
That slow, progressive work is what will pay the dues over 20, 30, 40 years, the type of stuff that we don't want to hear about. We want to hear that I put in 100,000 into Bitcoin and I'm a millionaire today.
Yeah.
So what's the second one?
So that's the first one. Then the second one is that if there are certain things that you allow to be part of your toolbox of your habits, things like spending frivolously, things like not being consistent and tracking yourself. So habits, bad habits, it's like weeds. They will eventually choke out the good things that you are doing. And so, and these things, it doesn't matter if you earn 1,000 rands or 100,000 rands. A bad habit is a bad habit is a bad habit. And you just ruthless with it. And I think for people who are thinking wealth creation, it's very good to take moments of reflection and say, where are my blind spots? Where are my bad habits? And perhaps even have an accountability partner, and not think because you are in a certain tax bracket that you are You are beyond having.
You have arrived. But also, if you're not earning much, that doesn't exclude you from certain habits as well. Because I think that was one of the things I enjoyed about Epokotweni, because you talk about these principles that apply, whether you have 10 Rand in your pocket, 10,000 Rand or 10 million Rand in your pocket. A principle is a principle is a principle. It remains the same. And what is your third one?
So the third principle, I think, is absolutely essential as we talk about wealth creation, Jolly, is giving and thinking of people who have less than what we have. Because whether you earn 1,000 Rands a month, there's somebody else who is worse than you, who's worse off than you, and who you could make a difference to. There is a school, there is an old age home, there is a kids' home, there is a shelter. There is always someone who is a lot less more privileged than what we are. And I think that even as we dream and aspire to be wealthy individuals, that we need to keep this very much top of mind, front and center, that just about accumulating for our own pleasure and our own needs, and actually can give us the ability to make the world a better place by serving or using it to help out with the causes and the people that we care the most about, because there will always be, as much as our needs, there'll always be another holiday for me to go to. There is a long
another car.
But that just turns me then into this person who just wants for me, mine, and who's at the center of my own little universe. And I don't think that is the reason why we were created. I think that part of looking out, being brothers and sisters keepers, or even being keepers of the planet, of the earth and life, is giving towards causes and people that we are passionate about, things that are close to our hearts. Yes. And it doesn't leave you broke and unable to look after yourself, but it's very, very important that as we discuss the principles of budgeting, of being frugal, that we also make space to give.
That's so important, and very few people actually bring that up as part of wealth creation and wealth strategy. But at the same time, we balance this with some of the expectations that society, our family, our circles around us have of us as people. So I think that's absolutely incredible. So for those who want to know, where do they find Epokotweni?
So Epokotweni is hosted on Anchor. It's a podcast hosting platform. It's also on Spotify. If you subscribe via Google Podcasts, you can also find it there. Very soon, we're going to be on Apple Podcasts as well. To make it easy, what we've done is that we have put in all of our social media pages, we have put the link tree, which is the link of all of the platforms where you can find the podcast. That's where we also announce when we've got interviews or when we've got media engagements, but that's most of all where you will always find our latest episodes. And so if you go to our Facebook page, Epokotweni, THWE, Epokotweni, it's the same handle on Instagram. It's the same handle on Facebook as well as on Twitter. We'll eventually get to YouTube as well. And soon, because there's a lot of our friends who aren't on any social media platforms. And so we're going to look to create a WhatsApp sharing arrangement from next month so that people can spread and share the links to our episodes with people far and wide. Our parents' generations, Jolly, are so active on WhatsApp. And actually, WhatsApp has been a source of headaches in this pandemic with all sorts of false information. And so I thought, why not use it to spread the podcast of Epokotweni, because the anchor link is very easy to use over WhatsApp. You just click and automatically listen. You don't need to download any app or anything like that or subscribe. Really useful for people who are not on the Instagrams, Facebook, and Twitters of this world.
Babalwa, it's been absolutely incredible having you here as a guest today. I am sure this is not going to be our last interview together. We definitely are going to want an update on what's happening with Epokotweni and what the future holds, and any new initiatives that you've got happening in that space. For now, I wish you all the best of luck, and we'll definitely be sharing any links that we have that we get from yourselves in the show notes below. But otherwise, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for the time, Jolly.
Thank you for watching Wealth at Work. We look forward to sharing more stories and profiling other dynamic entrepreneurs and business people. Like and share, and please leave a comment telling us what topics you would like to see next. From me, Jolly Mokorosi, thank you and goodbye.
Most of the young Black professionals who may not earn enough, they think they're not earning enough, but they may find that either men, when they are women, earn more than them, or whites, when they're Black, earn more than them. And then they hustle and they don't grow in their careers because they're busy trying to earn additional income to keep up, with the Motsepes, or to keep up with everybody else. So we should just be careful that we are not in that trap of low salary, which is your main bread and butter, just because we are not negotiating and we are being treated unfairly at work. And then we have to hustle for additional income because, again, we've got so many responsibilities and even needs. Yeah.